Some people just have a sad ending to their life, where secrets are brought to light for everyone to see and judge that sadly have to be their last moments. Anne Heche had a death of violent circumstances that she created for herself, sadly. How did the beautiful 90s beauty go from on top of Hollywood, big movies, big stars with her, the talk of the town, for good and bad, headlines obsessed with her and her partner at once. At one time it seemed as though Anne was going to be on top for a long time, forever maybe. But as we've seen in Hollywood, many times the crown of king or queen changes hands many times. Her movies, they're still moments of comfort for people that grew up in the 90s. But as the main walkway of Hollywood left Anne, she found herself in a new moment, right in her life, that sadly became out of control. This is the death of Anne Heche that we all watched in real time.
Love it. I love that I'm leaving my 20s behind. I can't wait for 30.
I'm blacklisting for taking Ellen DeGeneres to the Volcano premiere years ago, and I didn't do a studio picture for 10 years.
Out in the death of actress Anne Heche.
Severe brain injury does remain an illness. She did crash her car.
Two-story death has been revealed days after she was removed from life support. The death was also ruled an accident. Heche was injured earlier this month.
Anne's last days of life looked nothing like what the public knew of her, even while still living in Hollywood. Anne almost lived 3 different lives in 2 decades. She had 2 children that she loved and cared for, but in those 2 decades, many things happened. Anne's firstborn was born in 2002 to her ex-husband. They were married from 2001 till 2009, a long time for Hollywood years. Anne's second child, her baby, Atlas, he was born in 2009. The boy's father is James Topper. James and Anne met on the set of Men in Trees in 2007. They stayed in touch, a little too in touch, starting a relationship that lasted until 2018, another long relationship. There's many different sides and elements to Anne that help maybe see what happened in the end. Many key moments in her life that help shed light on that situation. One of the first being in 2003, where Anne released a book called Call Me Crazy. In the book, Anne goes into detail of her childhood and of the terror she lived in. She talked about the mental health problems she had had in the past, the doubt, confusion, but saying she was healed from all the trauma. Anne would talk about these moments in her life where she said that God had even spoken to her directly, telling her it was her mission to enlighten humanity. But also 20 years later, what people didn't know, that at the time of Anne's death, she had been working on the sequel to her first book, where now she would spill the beans on her relationships and her run-in with Harvey Weinstein. But Anne would never see the release of the book. Back in the 90s, with her career getting life and her personal life becoming a public affair for everyone to comment about, you have to understand that this was a different time in the world when Anne came into the spotlight of Hollywood. She was young, beautiful, and a blonde-headed woman with a sweet voice. People ate her up, as Hollywood did. But it was also a moment in time where same-sex marriage wasn't allowed yet, and people that were openly in same-sex relationships weren't really out in the open in Hollywood, nor was it so accepted openly as it is today. Essentially in the late 90s, it was the construction grounds that went right into the early 2000s for same-sex couples to have the same freedoms and rights of anybody else. Anne was really one of the first people in the big push in that moment when it came right to mainstream Hollywood. She was the one pushing forward while others were pushing back. Anne had been in a public relationship with Ellen DeGeneres. At the time, Ellen was a well-known comedian and having small parts in movies, but this wasn't the Ellen that people know today. She wasn't a household name at this moment. Anne was a huge part of the film industry in the 90s, being part of some of the biggest films of that era. She made a name for herself, small parts, big parts. Her career was skyrocketing, but shocking the public when she showed up to the red carpet showing of Volcano with Ellen by her side, just solidifying that her and Ellen were a couple. Through major TV, it's not what Hollywood wanted for Anne. It wasn't the image that they had in mind. But Anne and Ellen would push the red carpet boundaries more than once, and the media had no mercy on them for that. They made fun of her and Ellen. They became easy targets for jokes, for late night TV. Anne would spill the beans decades later on a podcast that she was threatened that day, that if she ever brought Ellen to another red carpet, she would never work again in Hollywood. It just wasn't in the zeitgeist then, and when it was on TV, same-sex couples, they were looked at different, or the funny person in the background. It wasn't taken serious. People were scared of it, and even Anne says when that happened, it hurt her career. As Anne's career was grabbing big parts in big movies, in the late 90s, as fast as it was going, it slowed down even faster, and the mental aspect of it all would hit Anne. She was now finding her career was completely changing, finding herself in smaller parts, and being pushed away from mainstream Hollywood. Anne and Ellen would split in 2000. From that point on, Ellen's career would skyrocket. It was just the moment in time where the world knew Anne Heche and Ellen DeGeneres as lovers. The last moments of Anne's life in 2022 were full of whispers from people around her, and the last few years had been open about her past, doing podcasts, hosting them, really making a huge appearance on many different ones. Anne's podcast that was called Better Together was full of wild moments with her, and really did more damage than good for her career. It showed too much of Anne and what she was going through in those last moments. Not only was it audio, but it was filmed and you could watch it. So you could see that Anne was just radical and off her rocker, drunk at times, even admitting to it, and looking as though she was on some kind of substance. But it's just more clues of what was going on in those final moments with her. But also in these moments, Anne would talk about private elements in her life that she had never talked about before openly. She gave details about her and Ellen at one time, talking about the private moment of when her and Ellen split. Anne was putting most of this in her new book that she was secretly working on in the background. Most people at this time weren't even aware that Anne was really still acting in Hollywood. But she was. She was just taking small roles that were given to her, most of them daytime television. Hollywood really wanted nothing to do with her. Anne had just hit a brick road when it came to the industry. It wasn't smooth anymore. It was now a rough ride. She was looking for a reboot, and she needed it bad. And the release of the new book would be the jump start, along with her podcast that she needed badly. Leading up to the last days of Anne's life, evidence was building around her that will help shed light on what happened on her last day. We know that Anne, in the month before she died, she had 13 traffic violations, some specifically for speeding and the other ones for aggressively driving right into traffic at 90 miles an hour. The signs were there just for this basic moment of danger. She was putting the public at risk. It's also known that Anne was dealing with mental health problems as well, dipping in and out of reality. There were strong signs to the public where you could see Anne doing interviews at night, paparazzi walking up on her, and Anne just not looking 100% there mentally, speaking in riddles, even at times being caught walking out of restaurants drunk and rambling, stumbling, just completely falling apart in front of the paparazzi as they ate it up. How had Anne let this happen? How was no one around her, helping her, guiding her? It was obvious that she was in trouble. Anne had talked about her mental health for decades. Even in her first book, she talked about this, but saying she had dealt with it and overcome it. But now in her later life, it seems to be a real issue for her. Anne seemed to be all over the map in the last months of her life. Moments of her in spiritual moments, dancing with people, giving weird interviews, looking disheveled at some moments, and other moments looking like a completely different person. Almost as if Anne had split personalities. The last week of Anne's life, she had her last podcast 3 days before her death. In that podcast, Anne is intoxicated, even talking about it and laughing. It seemed that Anne's life just kept getting more and more compressed into just one big stupor of lost and rambling and intoxication that was now obvious for everyone that was looking in. It seemed that the end was just unstoppable. August 5th of 2022 was Anne's last day, conscious and moving. In that morning, elements start to unfold quick, and Anne has a short day. The first sighting of Anne that morning was around 9 o'clock. She stops at a wig store and is there for a decent amount of time, talking to the owner a good bit. They even take a picture together. This would be Anne's last picture posing with anyone and smiling. She buys a wig and soon she leaves. From that moment, Anne's Mini Cooper is seen around town as it's speeding, First, it's seen pulling out of an alleyway, almost hitting a person, and more than likely almost causing an accident, once again pulling into a busy road. The next time we see Ann, it's moments later. She's ran into the side of a building. People start recording from their phone. Man is yelling at her to step out of her car, telling her to shut the car off. But Ann just says calmly, "No, I'm not going to do that." In the car right next to the gear shift, we can see a liquor bottle. Ann speeds off, almost causing another accident. These images are the very last images we know of Ann, moments before what's about to happen next. At this point, some people catch a Mini Cooper driving through their neighborhood at unbelievable speeds, and house cameras catch a car driving by at a very fast speed. Then with a loud boom that rings through the street, out of a very nice neighborhood, Ann has drove her Mini Cooper right into the front of a house. At 11 a.m. that morning, Ann would drive her Mini Cooper directly into a house in Mar Vista, an area of Los Angeles. At 90 miles an hour, the car makes it deep into the house and immediately sets everything around it on fire. Ann is tossed under the passenger floorboard of the vehicle, where she's stuck. This would somewhat protect her from the raging flames outside of the vehicle, but not from the smoke. But with Ann being wedged underneath the floorboard of the passenger seat, no one could see her due to the smoke. When firemen arrive on the scene, it takes them 20 minutes to even know that Ann's in the vehicle, because they just can't see her. They don't see a figure in the driver's seat, passenger seat, or the back seat, so they think the driver's just gotten out and ran away. But somehow they do see movement eventually in the vehicle, and it's Ann. It takes another 20 minutes for them to pull the vehicle out of the house to where they can reach Ann, pulling her out of her car, placing her on a stretcher, and wheeling her to an ambulance to where she jumps up, being pushed back down and tossed in the back of an ambulance. When Ann is taken to the hospital, she's immediately put on life support, and it doesn't take long for them to see that Ann is simply just brain dead, which in California means if you're brain dead, you're legally dead. Ann never improves, and it doesn't take long for the family to realize the situation's not going to get any better, but keep her on the ventilator until August 14th so her organs can be harvested. When Ann's blood was taken, one of the major key components that's in cocaine was in Ann's blood still. They could tell that Ann did not have active cocaine in her system at the time of her crash, but it had just been days before she had done cocaine. But there was no alcohol in her system. The main cause of Ann's death were from smoke inhalation and burns all over her body and damage right to her skull that essentially damaged her brain. It's a wild way to lose your life when everyone gets to see it unfold. And the one place that makes stories like this happen in big movies. But this wasn't a movie. This was real life, with a real starlet that lost her life that day in a terrible way. The death of Ann Heche at 53.